welcome to What Scream. This is the podcast where I, your host, Ogali Miss Dolly, chats with a special guest every week about horror films. And in particular, we discuss two films that have to do with a certain subject or theme that I've previously randomly chosen. So I hope everybody is enjoying that come down from Fright Fest. I'm very, very, very jealous of everyone who got to attend it in person this year. I was very lucky that I was invited to do reviews by Moving Pictures Film Club. So I got to see a few of the films beforehand, and it's such a great mix of films. I would like to particularly plug two films. That is The Sadness, which is an extreme horror film. Pretty extreme, like on the extreme end of extreme. If that is your kind of thing, I definitely would recommend it. And also there was a New Zealand film called Coming Home in the Dark, which was brilliant. I mean, I think films from New Zealand just kick it out the ballpark every time. I love New Zealand horror films. But yeah, they're my two picks from this year's Fright Fest. I know quite a few of the films that were on the lineup are coming onto like Shudder and a few other streaming sites, so keep an eye out for them there. So this week, I guess I better introduce the theme. It is now, right? So it's been pointed out to me that a lot of the time I'm like, I'm not a fan of this theme. That was pointed out to me by Sheree from Nightmare on Fear Street. So thanks. Funnily enough, this week's theme would probably be my third favorite horror subgenre. So, just to make a bit of a difference, I actually like this week's theme. I enjoyed it for once. And that is the theme of found footage. I know a lot of people have gripes over it, but I really like it when it's done well. And there's a lot of films that do it really freaking well. So the found footage subgenre is where it's kind of presented as video or film footage, and it's, found. The cinematography is usually done by like the actors themselves, like shaky camera work and kind of naturalistic kind of acting. The footage might be raw and kind of complete, or sometimes it has been edited into a narrative by those who found it. So it is mainly used in horror films, a little bit in sci-fi as well. We could say that the very first one was Cannibal Holocaust, which is the 1980 Italian cannibal film written by Gianfranco Clerici and directed by Ruggero Deodato. But then we had the Blair Witch Project, which kind of burst onto the scene, and it didn't really start a trend because it was like the only one of its time. But it was definitely like, if Cannibal Holocaust was like the grandparent, then the Blair Witch Project was the next generation, the parent. And then the children are like Paranormal Activity and Rex and Cloverfield. Yeah, I really like it because I think it adds a lot more realism to it, especially when it's done right, when you're kind of giving a reason for the filming, like why are they carrying on filming even though horrific things are starting to happen. It's done so freaking well, like so well. I love it. And I think some of the most terrifying films are found footage. Like, don't tell me that you didn't freak out at the first Paranormal Activity. So yeah, that is our theme for the week, and I'm so excited because I love this theme. And my guest this week is Chandler Bullock, and together we are talking about, I guess, the mummy of found footage films, which is the Blair Witch Project from 1999, and then one of the offspring, which is the zombie film Wreck from 2007.
So I would like to welcome to the podcast Chandler Bullock. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. And how is your corner of the world?
It's probably about the same as it is in most corners of the world right now, but we're all surviving and doing the best we can. So, I mean, on my end, in my little household, we're doing quite well.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So would you like to give a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, my name's Chandler, as we've already established. I'm the host of the Beauty of Horror podcast, which is a relatively new weekly podcast on the Anatomy of a Scream's Pod Squad network, where I kind of dissect horror films through the lens of, is it beautiful? And apply a bit of philosophy on beauty, because that's what I'm working on for my master's thesis.
Oh, wow.
Kind of just a way for me to procrastinate while still doing the work, and I get to talk to people. So it's really fun. And
that sounds great.
Next to that, yeah, I'm a horror writer, host, and I'm also an executive producer at an immersive event company, I guess is the best way we could describe ourselves these days. Started as an escape room business, but we really do like immersive, games, events, anything in person that you can do, real life gaming.
All right. Okay. And do any of these events kind of focus on horror?
Most of them.
Most of them. I'm so intrigued. I want to tell me more. Tell me more. What is it? Okay. Is it like scare acting, or is it like more the escape room kind of?
So it really depends on the event. So we have a few. Well, right now we have two mainstays, and we have one that we're working on that's a little on the hush side. But the main one that we have that brings in a bit of attention from people is called the Amsterdam Catacombs. I'm based here in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And we have built a catacomb system under a cathedral here in Amsterdam, where you are tasked as a team of investigators to go figure out what the hell's going on down there. You get we make sure that your onboarding is also really immersive. So you have a character, the whole email is just a character who's writing to you for help and stuff.
Yeah.
And then, by the time you get there, it's more of an escape room. So you are left to your own devices through most of it. But as things go along, we've decided to make it just get increasingly more frustrating and frightening. Yeah. So there's a lot of scare acting mixed in with the escape room experience.
That sounds right up my street. Like,
well, come on over.
That sounds amazing. Anywhere like I've gone in Europe, I've always looked for like catacombs or something along those lines. So, I've been to like the ones in Edinburgh, I've been to the ones in Paris. But that sounds amazing. Like that would make like top kind of like hen party, or like kind of like that would be my perfect hen party for any of my bridesmaids that are listening. That's what I want to do. Yes, that sounds absolutely amazing. And how did you come up with this? Was it just like, we'll do escape rooms, but we'll make it even extra?
Well, I've come onto the company in my role somewhere later in their existence, and so I also came in after the Catacombs was already made, but I do manage it now.
Yeah.
And so I spoke a lot with our previous manager, and he said that what they did was they already had a game where it was a bit more traditional. That's where our head office is. It's one of those places where it's like an old school that's now like a creative studio.
Yeah.
And we have a basement that we use for the escape room. And they're like, we want to do a new game, but we want to do a new game in a different location. And the owner was like, I want to do something with horror.
Yeah.
So he hired our previous manager, and they were kind of, checking the place out, checking out Amsterdam. And they heard about the basement area of this church.
Yeah.
That the whole church is defunct. It's all used as an event hall. So for instance, you could have your hen party downstairs and get married right upstairs. Like that's what you could do.
Yeah.
But they were only having like BDSM parties and stuff down there because it's really cool to do.
Yeah.
In a space like this, but the type of people who have BDSM parties don't really pay their rent all the time, nor do you have a BDSM party like every night.
Yeah.
So rent was becoming expensive, and they wanted something more regular. And we're like, whoa, this thing's for rent. This is the weirdest place we've ever heard. They looked around and like, okay, so we're going to do a catacomb. They knew that for sure based on the location. And from there, you just start developing your story as you develop the puzzles and try to figure out how to merge the two together in a cohesive way that they, complement each other. Everything makes sense when you're done.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what is the name of the company, just so you can have a bit of a plug?
Oh, well, the name is Logic Locks. So if ever you're
Okay.
interested, anybody out there, we also do online experiences. So if you are
Oh,
not able
nice.
to come to Amsterdam, we've actually converted it due to COVID. We now have it as an accessibility option, though, for people who can't actually physically be there.
That's
We
great.
have an online version of the game, which plays like a found footage horror movie that you get to control.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, I'm going to sign up for that pretty much as I get off this call. That is so cool. And you know what? Like, I know obviously the pandemic is awful and what we're going through is really bad, but it has kind of furthered accessibility for people
Yes.
and for companies also to reach outside of their like kind of limits where they're kind of their location limits. It has forced companies to be like, you know what, we can take this online and we can, that is such a great idea.
Yeah, I was just hired as the manager, and then I think about 4 months in, the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lockdown yet, but we were already seeing it coming.
Yeah.
And we were immediately thinking, like, how are we going to not fold? Every other company was going to have a problem with it. And so I was there like, well, I mean, I know a bit about horror movies, so maybe we can do
That's
something
great.
with that. And yeah, it was really cool to work on that. It's a lot of work because the actor who does that is, normally we're maybe acting with you about 20 minutes out of a game, but this is like a full 2-hour thing, just talking to you, doing improv.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So how did you get into horror? And do you remember your first kind of horror experience or the first horror film you ever saw?
I remember most of those things, actually. So I got into horror mainly through my dad. I didn't know him too well when I was younger because my parents were already separated when I was like 2. But, he was also a truck driver. So every time he would come by in our area, he'd be like, hey, can I see my kid? And then we would kind of hang out for a day or two.
Yeah.
And he was that irresponsible parent. It's like, well, I'm here now and this is what's on TV, so I don't care. So my first horror movie at the age of 3, when it aired, was Stephen King's It from 1990.
Oh my God. And how many years of therapy have you been?
0. I am a fortunate kid. I loved the hell out of clowns. So
Okay.
I just thought, because I don't know if you had it in Ireland, but have you ever heard of Bozo the Clown?
No, I've heard it mentioned though.
So Bozo the Clown was kind of like if you were to take an arcade and then put a circus show on top of it. So you got kids and stuff to do like the skeet ball and everything. And very Price is Right kind of stuff for kids. But then you had a clown who was hosting it, and I just loved it. I thought, hey, this is bright and colorful. And they designed Tim Curry's character to look a lot like Bozo to traumatize people who grew up with Bozo in the 60s. But I grew up with old man Bozo in the 80s and the 90s, so I was just like, Bozo's being weird. I didn't really. Apparently, only the spider stuff seemed to freak me out when I was at that age. Yeah, but the first horror experience, I suppose, when we're talking about being afraid of things, that probably had to come around the time I was around 5 or 6, and some of my friends were at my mom's work. We were all at this convenience store that she worked at behind the cash registers.
Yeah.
And they were just telling me what a werewolf was.
Right. Okay.
And that just fucked me up.
Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah. Like I always remember like being a kid as well, and it was always less about what I saw on like TV or films and more about what my friends were telling me. Or I had this uncle that was like, he was a good bit older than me, and I'd always be like, tell me scary stories, he'd tell me ghost stories, and that was it. I wasn't sleeping for a week. Like, but it's so funny how like this folkloric style of tradition is actually sometimes more scary than, and I feel like that's something we're going to touch on with our theme this week as well. But yeah, that's so funny that I was just think it's so interesting how like ghost stories and stuff is more frightening than perhaps like the films. But yeah, I've gotten interested in a certain line of like psychology recently, which is children and horror films. So I want to ask you the question, do you think that your love of horror films from an early age has affected you in adult life in either a good way or a bad way?
I would say yes, it has. And I would say in a good way. I think that the only thing that wasn't done super well is just that, keep in mind being a child of a divorce and the separations, I had one parent who loved it, one parent who hated it. So the parent who loved it wasn't around but exposed me to it. The parent who hated it was like, I'm not going to talk to you about it because I don't even want to talk about it. So I was just left to be terrified in my bedroom in Mississippi in the middle of the woods, you know?
Oh God.
So we lived in a lot of places, but definitely in a lot of nature. So you hear, crap outside and you just don't know what to do with it. I think if I had had more, so if you're careful with your kids and you really explain to them and dissect what they just experienced and how they're feeling, I think you're actually teaching kids how to process their emotions quite well, because for me, I was one of the most high tense, terrified kids of everything.
Yeah.
And for me to be able to be into horror films and actually look for that when I don't do things in real life that frighten me.
Yeah.
It shows that on an emotional level, I can probably process just about anything if you give me enough time and care.
Yeah.
And I do think that slight shock at an early age can help you get to that point. I'm not saying you should shock the hell out of your kids or traumatize them, but I am saying that early exposure allows you to have a bigger tolerance for things. Yeah,
absolutely. I completely agree with you. I have a 3-year-old and I will not be showing him it just yet.
Page.
But I do want to introduce him to horror because I do feel that horror fans are more, as you said, well equipped to deal with big emotions. And, they've said that even through the pandemic, horror fans are better at dealing with what we're going through because they've already kind of not lived through it, but they've already kind of experienced it in a more kind of controlled arena, which is watching films or immersing themselves in horror. So I do want to carry on the tradition of my son watching horror. But yeah, I'm always interested on whether there is any bad kind of side effects, and I haven't found anyone yet. I mean, obviously we all hear about the serial killers, they were big into horror and violence, but what do you think of that kind of take on it?
I think that's very reductive because I think just about any human being in the world is interested into the psychology of serial killers themselves. So we all have morbid curiosities. We're all into things that we shouldn't really be interested in. That's just human nature. So I'd say that, it was the morbid curiosity and how to dissect an animal at the age of 3 that was more that's pointing more towards they have some sort of mental health issues that need to be resolved. But just because they like the look of a heavy metal magazine or they like to play Doom, I just don't think it really matters. And I actually think that if you do all that stuff in media, you're far more likely to just get out the carnal feeling that you're experiencing at that moment anyway. But if you shelter people, I was really fascinated by serial killers as a teenager. I studied a lot more people than I probably should have. And a lot of them were just sheltered kids who were just told, don't do this, don't do that. You can't handle the world. And they just started destroying the world as a result. So I think the more you shelter people, the less you're going to know what they're going to do with your input.
Absolutely. So let's move on to our theme for this episode, which is the found footage movie. So what are your thoughts on found footage? Are you a fan?
I love them. I think that it is one of the most pure ways to do a horror story, in my opinion. It's not my favorite genre by any means, but it's just one that I can always jump into and just have a bit of fun. And it's probably the only genre to this day that still scares me.
Yeah. And why is it that it scares you?
You already touched on it a little bit. I didn't think of it that way until you said it earlier. But yeah, that folkloric kind of ghost story element to it. It's really us trying to say these tapes were real and they were found in a garbage bin. And you're like, fine, urban legend me. I will try to believe that. And if you hold on to this kind of artifice the whole time, it can really get in your head. Yeah. But I think the main thing, it's simple. It's first person. Yeah. And just that makes you more connected to what's going on screen.
Yeah. And it's definitely a more believable form of storytelling. So it's you kind of almost empathize more with the characters because they're just actors. But while you're in that situation of watching this film, they're not just actors to you. They kind of seem like real people. So it's easier to empathize. And it's just I think of all the recent films that have really scared the crap out of me, and they've all been found footage. And it's just something so immersive about the found footage genre that it just sucks you in. And I think that's the best way to give you a scare.
Oh yeah. I just, something about also it can tease you a lot more using that camera and getting real close to the action. You can just like, don't show me, don't get close to it. But you also have the same reactions that you would have with a normal film. If you were to be like, don't go in there and don't do these things. But, with a movie in the third dimension, to put it that way, you would more likely just be talking about the logic of the characters. Whereas when it's found footage, you're kind of like, I would do this entirely differently. And now I have to experience what it's like to make bad decisions. And it's terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think makes a good found? Like, what is the essential points to a good found footage film?
Okay. I think good found footage has to do a few things to make it work. For one, you have to create believable characters. So flawed, they shouldn't be speaking too clearly, they shouldn't look too nice. We need to see these people on their off day, basically. Very candid kind of stuff. You also need to establish your technology and the use of your technology really well. Again, don't over establish it because then it's a movie. Yeah. But if you really just establish somebody's walking in the woods with their phone, therefore it looks like a phone, and maybe give me a reason why they're filming everything.
Yeah.
That's about it. For the rest, go nuts. And I think that's why I love it so much. You don't know, like, there's no limit to what you can do with the found footage movie.
Yeah. That last point you made is always really important to me, that you have to have a reason for continuing to film. Because, if someone's filming, you're like, why are you still filming this? You should be like, getting the fuck out of there. But so like there's a few films. There's the Devil's Doorway, which is an Irish found footage film, and it's about two priests, and they have to keep filming for the Vatican. They can't stop filming because it all has to go back to the Vatican for them to use this footage and blah, 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 blah. But I've seen a few found footage films where you're just like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. Stop filming. And I think that's where it's like a really fine line that it can either be a brilliant found footage or a really bad one.
And it doesn't have to be a good reason. It's just if there is no logical reason, at the very least, I expect the film to address it. One of the movies that we're going to discuss today does this brilliantly. That they set up the fact that it isn't logical that you're filming, but that's the point. The character has a character flaw, basically. But you take a movie like Cloverfield, and they're like, I don't know, and I love Cloverfield. All of it looks good and great, but that one element of it just feels so. This is a Hollywood production that looks like a found footage movie.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Cloverfield. It actually made me feel quite like motion sicknessy kind of. I was like, imagine. But yeah, I just didn't. It wasn't believable enough for me. Like you said, it was a bit too Hollywood for me. Right. So let's crack on with our first film. Would you like to introduce it and give a brief synopsis, please?
All right. I'll do my best. I did not write down a synopsis, so I'm going to have fun. We're going to be talking about the Blair Witch Project as our first film. And so you have three young filmmakers, Heather, Mike, and Josh, who are working on a documentary about the Blair Witch, who is a folkloric figure in Burkittsville, Maryland?
Yeah.
Yes, I almost said Maine, but Maryland. And they interview a bunch of people about the witch, and they're going to go to the hot spots to just do this kind of like student documentary. And then when they go into the woods to try to find a very specific location, they instantly get lost and things start to get really weird.
Yes.
It's about the best you can say without dissecting it immediately.
Yes. I love the Blair Witch. Like the first time I saw it, I was so creeped out, like so. And I was quite, I was about 20 odd when I watched it. And it just creeped me out. What is your thoughts on the Blair Witch? Are you a big fan of it?
Huge fan. Huge. It's one of the few films that just consistently creeps me out. And I love the aesthetic of this movie. I love the filmmaking decisions that they put into this movie. It's one of those that I get people are like, well, but it's just a bunch of shaky cam and then somebody falls over. If you want to, reduce it to that, I suppose that is correct. But I don't need a lot of action in a found footage movie. I need a lot of substance, and the substance is real if you're paying attention to it.
Yeah.
I saw it when I was probably 15 or 16 around the time it came out. Didn't see it in cinemas, but I got it on VHS, which somehow getting a found footage movie on VHS just it enhances everything.
Yeah. It almost makes it's like an experience then, you know. I remember my older sister, she's a good bit older than me, and she saw it when she first came out, but she saw it, so she lived or was in Australia at the time, and they have like massive open air cinemas, and there was this one particular cinema that was in the middle of a clearing of a woods, and she saw it there. And she was just like, oh dear God, I'm gonna die tonight. But so when the Blair Witch came out initially, it wasn't the first found footage film. Obviously, we had stuff like Cannibal Holocaust before it, but it wasn't like everyone says that it was the found footage film that sparked the found footage, when it didn't really. No. It came out in 1999, and then I think the next found footage wasn't until Paranormal Activity. I think that was the next big...
Yeah, I mean, there were a few attempts, but that was the only one that got like studio backing.
Yeah, and then that's when the found footage kind of took off. But the Blair Witch Project, the reason it's so unique and such a pinnacle movie in horror was because of its marketing campaign. Yep. Like, genius. Second to none. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the marketing campaign and what you know about it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're getting firsthand experience here, because I was a nice, young preteen in 1999 with the internet. And we saw shit for this movie everywhere. They had newspaper clippings of "Have you seen these people?" They had actual news programs talking about it as if it was real. So, fortunately, they were responsible enough not to put a full Miranda alert for it, but they did actually get newscasters to be like, 3 young filmmakers are still not found, lost in Burkittsville, Maryland. And we're like, man, that's a pretty dire situation. We saw their poster. So the film poster for it, before they finally had a proper film poster, was just their missing posters that they would put in the cinema sometimes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had the website that if you were that nerd who was into the internet before Y2K, you could go and see all this information that's supposed to be about a movie. And it's just it kind of felt like one person obsessed about this, and we're just, please help us find our family. And it was all so realistically done. And they just sprinkled lore throughout the whole thing and just taught you more and more and more about this folktale. So when you went into the movie, you knew what you were getting into before you started.
Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about folklore. And, the film's based on the idea of folklore. So we've got, the Blair Witch, who was a wrongly accused woman, accused of witchcraft, taken into the woods. Her legend lives on. It's like this big thing in this town in Maryland. And, they set the whole story up by interviewing people before they go into the woods. And, some of these people weren't even actors. They were just random people that they were like, hey, just talk about this scary thing for us. And then the smart thing about Blair Witch is it's about folklore, and then it became folklore itself. Like, that is so smart. And I can't think, apart from perhaps Paranormal Activity, but not to the same point, I can't think of another film that has done that.
No. I could totally see the team behind Host doing that. But, we've only got the first installment, but those are some crazy geniuses. So I can imagine they're going to mess with us somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that film, Host, made me terrified to go on Zoom. I was like, oh. So back to the Blair Witch. How did you feel about the initial setup of the film?
In what way?
So, before they even go into the woods. So it's the first few. Yeah, because, a lot of people say, oh, it goes on a bit, nothing scary happens. And it's like, well, yes, because they have to make it look real.
I was a film nerd even as a kid without realizing I was a film nerd. So I loved like those. I did not like big budget National Geographic documentaries. I liked the local documentary that they made in our local news station. So it had that charm of just some people slapping shit together. So I really enjoyed it because I thought it was the most genius way for me to get to know these people. Yeah. And keep in mind, I was young. So I believed I was essentially watching a snuff film. I really believed that it was, or at least there's a part of me like, I mean, it can't be real, right? I was just kind of doubting it constantly. So I think it's kind of like when The Exorcist starts in Iraq and you're not in a little girl's bedroom immediately. People think, did I pick up the right movie?
Yeah.
What is this? Because there's nothing remotely scary going on. They're just looking at equipment and getting high. And I was, the moment they started interviewing people, I was enthralled.
Yeah.
And there's no mood to it, in my opinion, at least. They don't try to set a tone. They try to set a realistic tone. So maybe it's also because my mom made a lot of home videos when I was growing up, and it felt that way. Had that kind of chaos of just daily life.
Yeah, I love the setup of it because, like you said, we introduced these characters, and they're not necessarily likable characters. Like they're really not, but they're real. Like they're not likable at all. But they're real. Like we know people like that, and you know whereas if it was set up like a normal film, we'd have to feel empathy for one of the characters, or, you know, we'd have to kind of connect with one. But these, it's like we're actually watching real people messing around in a supermarket, or, you know, getting their shit together and joking and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I feel that that setup is what makes it so immersive and so fucking scary when we get to, you know, the ending scene. And yet you almost feel like you're going along with them. Like you're in the woods with them.
And I've mentioned this before in a podcast, but I'll mention it again. I've worked on a small found footage film myself, and it was so silly. But yeah, that was about it was like an action thing where they were trying to recreate the hype of Batman.
Okay.
And from knowing how it was made and how we had our rapport and stuff as well, looking back on the Blair Witch Project, I see why it's so genius, is because that is what it feels like to make the movie as well. So all those candid moments probably are.
Yeah.
Probably just them in their hotel rooms. They gave them a camera and said, hey, just film whatever bullshit you say.
That's right, because the actors they use their real names.
Yeah.
And the directors were like, here, look, this is a script, but we want everything to be kind of improvised. Yeah. What do you think of it's rumors, nobody really knows if it's true, but of the fact that they kind of terrorize the actors to get them into that state? Do you think that kind of thing is necessary?
I have two minds of this. I do feel if you're making a production and you're dealing with professional actors, take, Kubrick with The Shining. You don't need to go to those levels ever, I feel. That's really just being nitpicky and frankly probably having some hyper focus that you're not letting go of.
Yeah.
When in this case, I think you're looking for spontaneity.
Yeah.
So it depends on what terrorizing entails, and if it is indeed just walking around and snapping twigs around there, I would say do it, because there's just, I love improv. We use a lot of improv at our escape room, and although it's always the same thing over and over again all day, we can always throw in something you don't expect and scare the hell out of our fellow actors so that they are scared along with the players. And so I do think it's fine. Just maybe get them a good drink and, have some them afterwards.
Yeah, you have a scale of 0 to Kubrick. Let's let's try and not,
in the scale somewhere.
Yeah.
Don't Kubrick at all.
No. So let's chat about the horror elements.
Yes.
What makes the Blair Witch so scary to you?
I think it's the question mark still. The fact that we don't see the whole picture and all the little details that we do get just defy logic. It's not that they're nonsensical. They just defy rational logic, except for the murders. So the murders are the only part that is just so horrific with those kids that I commend them on having that be the only visual from the tale that we actually get to see, because we know the ramifications of that.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me as well, it's the unknown. I read that the directors were heavily influenced by Jaws. Funnily enough, you wouldn't think they'd be influenced by Jaws, but they were. So what they wanted to do was they didn't want to show the witch. They wanted to keep it. Apparently, there was meant to be... they were meant to show the witch, but they almost forgot to film
Oh.
And they didn't go back and film it. They were just like, feck it, we'll leave it out. But yeah, they didn't want to show the witch or the monster until the end. But I still feel you get that kind of payoff anyway. The reason I find it so scary is because there's tiny little things everywhere. It's like the sticks being like hung up in the trees. It's the pile of rocks. It was the bag of teeth that they find in the bundle. Like that was it's something so little. It's just like teeth, but it was like, whoa, like no thank you, out of there. And it's the fact that they were just so confused themselves. They were going around in circles. It was like, is this all in their minds or is something out there? And I think that's what made it scary, that when you get that payoff at the end, it's just so fucked up by then that you're like, oh, holy shit. And then obviously, I mean, I remember when I first showed my little sister this film and it finished and she was like, I don't get it. What was the end? And I was like, do you not remember the guy talking at the very beginning saying about the serial killer who made kids face into the corner in the house? And I just think that last shot at the end stayed with me for ages afterwards.
It stayed with a lot of people. We talk about it all the time at work. I've had it before. I was just inspecting something on the wall. And I freaked a guy out. He was like, don't do the Blair Witch thing. Jesus Christ. And he was like, walked away. I was like, oh, sorry. I'm actually working over here. But it's a very dark place.
Yeah.
I agree with you that it's this combination of things that are so subtle and so real. That confusion that they have seems very real in a lot of ways. The way they fight. And also, I took the initiative today to watch it with headphones on.
Yes, I saw your tweet. Yeah.
That is a fucked up movie to watch with a really good headset on a Blu-ray, because, everything's been improved and all the little channels and stuff. And the things that I never noticed before, that I could finally hear conversations that I couldn't hear before.
Yeah.
It makes so much of the movie make sense, but it also makes I never could hear children laughing in one of the scenes. I only heard before on my VHS. Yeah. Now you could clearly hear giggling and baby crying and all those subtle noises. Whew. The sound design of this movie, I think, is one of the strongest parts of it. Yeah,
definitely. So what do you think is the Blair Witch's influence on horror?
Oh, on horror. Possibly the lasting impact of less is more. Since, it was the end of the 90s. In the 80s, we had all this excess. Throughout the 90s, people were focusing more on craft or on big budget. Those are kind of the two things you got in the 90s. So the Blair Witch was showing you you don't really need to have millions upon millions. You don't need to be Spielberg to make a horror movie.
Yeah.
And you also don't need to go, balls out basically the way they did in the 80s to make things scary. That just the suggestion of things could really get to you. But it's something I think that people kind of lost around that time. So I think it jump started and reminded everybody how powerful your own imagination can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I just feel like it was such, perhaps not an outwardly influence on massive horror, as you said, but the fact that it was these two indie directors with a budget of about 60 grand, and then look at what happened. And I feel it was such a beacon of light for indie directors to be okay, you know what, I can do this. If they can do it, I can do it. And I just feel like it had that kind of impact. I really think that, we wouldn't be seeing things like Saw pop up just a few years later if this didn't happen. Yeah, absolutely. So would you recommend the Blair Witch to horror fans? Any and every horror fan. I don't care what your taste is. And let's just get this out here. If you love a very specific kind of horror film and you're not really into slow burns, whatever, you're going to hate it, but you should still watch it. That's kind of how I feel about it. I think it's quintessential viewing. Then you can go complain about it afterwards. But if you do hate it, the challenge is to watch it again once you've calmed down and see if you still hate it. Absolutely. I agree. I just feel like it is a lesson in subtle but perfect filmmaking. Yes, absolutely. So let's move on to our second found footage film, which is the Spanish found footage film Rec. Not the American remake, which is Quarantine, I think. I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, I haven't seen it because I just refuse to.
That's okay.
I'm one of these purists that is like, I heard it was like pretty much a scene for scene remake, so I'm like, nope, I don't need to see it. It's fine.
It makes a bigger sin, in my opinion, and that's if you're going to do that kind of scene for scene remake, especially with the found footage movie, don't go for a more family friendly audience when the original wasn't family friendly.
Oh God,
So
yeah.
they've kind of taken out all of the viscera of the movie and just kept the intensity. I will say, for people who had never seen Wreck, Quarantine is fine. It is totally fine. But Wreck is an experience.
Oh God, it really is. So Wreck is a 2007 Spanish found footage horror film directed by Jaume Balaguero and Paco Plaza. And it has a news reporter and her cameraman, and they are following a fire crew in the city of Barcelona, and they are kind of shadowing them for the night to find out, what the average night is like for this fire crew. I think it's fire crew, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And then they get called to an apartment block, and shit goes south. It turns out that there is something happening that makes people basically turn into zombies, or what we'd think would be zombies. So they are shut into this apartment block. Everything is shut down. All of a sudden, they can't get out. There's like the equivalent of the CDC outside saying, no, you can't come out. They're all in hazmat suits. And there's like a Chinese family who own the shop downstairs. There's, a woman with her child. And there are a few other residents. And yeah, basically, shit gets bananas. What do you think of Wreck? Are you a fan?
Oh, Wreck is just so heavy metal. I love it. It's a good freaking
such a good explanation. It's heavy metal. Like
it's everything the Blair Witch Project was, and they said, fuck that. We're gonna just go in.
Turn it up to 11.
Yes. We're like, show, don't tell. There's no telling in these movies. Come on. I love it, and I will say, I've heard people say this before. It's kind of like a played out phrase at this point, but it does hit way differently in 2021 than it did when it came out. And from my perspective, it plays out way differently from an American perspective. And I can explain that a little later if you want us to, because there's some specifics about the framing of it. Yeah, that actually is in reference to some pretty impactful stuff from 9/11.
Okay. I obviously, not being an American, I wouldn't have kind of read into that. I love Wreck. See, I went through a big zombie phase in my teens. I'm sure every teenager does, like go into a zombie phase. And then I fell out of love with the zombie genre, and I haven't gone back because, a zombie genre is a bit like the slasher, as in it's very formulaic and it's very samey, and it's very rare that you get a zombie film that is different. So I hadn't seen Wreck up until literally a couple of months ago. Oh, wow. And I put it on, and it was like someone had melted my face off. I was just like, holy shit, this is fucking amazing. I've been to Barcelona countless times, so I know Barcelona, and the way it's set in that apartment block, I've been to places like that. I know the layout of that house like the back of my hand because I've been to Barcelona so much. And that just made it even more real for me. I was like, shit, this isn't a set. This is an actual place. Yes. And because my mother-in-law is Spanish, so my partner is half Spanish, we spend a lot of time in Spain, the way they talk as well, it's not like, I think you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about like the specifics for found footage. So in normal films, pronunciation's very clear and proper English, whereas when you've got found footage, it's just people talking normally. And so Wreck is like, that is Spanish. That is what Spanish people sound like when they're just talking. And, so it just felt all that more real to me. And I think that's why I fucking love Wreck so much.
Oh, yeah. I don't know a lot about Spain. I've been to Madrid once, and I can agree that the sort of the way that people treat each other is definitely what I experienced when I was in Madrid.
Yeah.
And the block as well, that the whole apartment building also reminds me of a few places I've been in Germany. So yeah, the realism, if you know Europe at least, it's totally there. And I loved how they put a lot of stereotypes and tropes in their characters. Very classic type of zombie lineup of people. You have your foreigners that nobody trusts. You have your inept doctor who's not really trained, a cop. In this case, you also have a fireman who's just kicking ass. So I love that everybody has those different roles, but it doesn't feel stereotypical because that's life, especially in an apartment building. You get weird people everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you want to say about the American kind of take on it?
Okay, so the thing that really hit me when I first saw the film was that one of the big things that hit us around 9/11, apart from the event itself, was they actually aired a documentary a few months afterwards because I had to edit it together. But there was like an NBC crew. I think it was NBC. Americans who are still in America, don't kill me if I forget which company it was. But a big budget documentary team were doing a piece on the New York Fire Department. It is the exact same setup. They weren't being irritating like Angela was the entire movie, but they were very professional. But they were just showing day in the life of probably the most overly overworked firemen in the entire country. And in the midst of them doing it, they heard about the first plane. So the documentary changes into a documentary about saving people during 9/11.
Wow.
And then they go into the World Trade Center. You see like the rubble, you see the glass coming down, you see people, the people who were jumping from a different perspective. And you just see these two filmmakers, these brothers, one's in one building, one's in the other building, trying to both save people, but also worrying about their brother the entire time. So it's a much different documentary than what it starts out as, which is exactly the premise for Rec.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That was completely new to me. That's kind of changes it slightly. I think the next time I view it, I'm going to be like, wow.
Yeah, it's more intense.
Yeah, just a little bit. And do you think that Rec and the kind of, like we see after 9/11, we had a lot of like the torture porn kind of came from it, you know. Do you think that Rec kind of came from that same time, same kind of influence, or do you think it was influenced by other things?
I think it was more influenced by French extremity, actually, since just a few years after Rec, we got Martyrs.
Yes,
and I think just about a year after that, after Rec, we got Inside. I felt that Spain and France were kind of on the same wavelength, but that might have more to do with regional. You know, I think French extremity is in that torture porn place without the same mentality, because Americans were just pissed. We just wanted to watch bad people suffer and get theirs. Whereas Europeans who are watching all of this and seeing the world change were probably seeing far more grief and tragedy through violence.
Yeah.
So that's where Rec kind of sits for me. I don't feel that it's relishing in the violence, but I feel that it's using the violence to create the emotion that you're supposed to be experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing I really loved about Rec was the fact that all of the kind of zombies, the monsters, they're so visceral, and their screams are horrible. Like, it was just like, ugh. But they were also like the child and the old lady. You know, they were like people that you don't really suspect that are going to be as kind of monstrous as they are. And I love it that they're like beating the shite out of these firemen who are meant to be like these big macho, you know, I'm gonna save the world kind of people, and it's just like this little old zombie lady like being a scary fucking thing. Like, seriously, that whole sequence just, I don't think I took a breath. I was just like
I love hearing this from somebody who saw it recently for the first time, because it's so fresh. I think I've seen it like 5 or 6 times. So for me, I'm just like, oh, hell yeah. It's like watching, you know, your favorite comeuppance moment in an action movie. But, you know, so for me, it's almost like 80s horror when it's like, here's that cool shit. Yeah. But it's so refreshing to see somebody who's still kind of like, what the hell is this movie doing? Yeah.
And then I loved that. So you think it's a straightforward zombie film. You're like, okay, some fucking virus has got out. It's fucking people up. And then we find out that there is a doctor who took a patient from Portugal, and she had some form of whatever it was, whether it was kind of like an occult thing, or we don't really know. And it's turned her into this thing that, like, I still can't describe it. I'm like, what was it like? And I haven't seen the sequels, and I know that it kind of gets explained a bit more in the sequels, I think.
Also, rewatching Rec explains it a bit. I don't know if you want me to like give my...
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, because yes, they explain this in the sequel, but just if you rewatch the end of Rec, you'll see it again. You should pay attention closely to the subtitles when they're going through the newspapers. Yeah. That she was put in the hospital after an exorcism.
Oh, okay. So yes, I remember now. Yeah.
Possessed, and she's a normal little girl when she's in the hospital, apart from being possessed. And yeah, he steals her, and then they listen to his audio diaries and his tapes, and you find out he has linked he's made some sort of link between the soul and the human body. So it's like he's so deeply devout that he's realized, if we have science, it's because God gave it to us. That means that all of miracles and stuff work in a scientific way. So he's trying to find the enzyme or the genome that creates demonic possession to inoculate people from possession. So to make a sort of vaccine against people who are possessed. Right. Doing so, he actually just fucks shit up even worse, because he takes her there. She gets too much to handle. He throws her into the attic and locks her up and just leaves, because he realizes that he accidentally made a damn virus that's spreadable through saliva. That just, the demon now just spreads through multiple people.
Nice.
Instead of one.
Nice. And I kind of, like, I do remember now, it must just slip my mind, but I do remember that ending now. And it's just, it's so interesting. That's another thing why I love Rec, is that it's not just a straightforward zombie film. Like I said, it had like this whole other, like, and I love possession as well, and I love occult, and I love all this kind of stuff. I just love Rec. I just love it. I think everyone should watch it. Like, they just need to watch it.
It's such a cool twist too. Like, if you haven't seen Rec and we just spoiled it for you, it doesn't matter. Go watch it, because the way they reveal this shit, you're gonna go like, what? It's still like, it's such a weird 180 turn that isn't obscene, or like, it totally fits the vibe of the rest of the film enough. Yeah. And it's just disturbing.
Yeah. And the end shot is just so fucking scary.
So here's the problem, another big problem with Quarantine. The cover art is that shot.
Yes.
What is that all about?
Yeah, it's what's her name? It's like Deborah from Dexter, isn't it?
Oh yeah, Jennifer Carpenter.
That's it, right? Yeah. And it's just her face. Yeah, I remember seeing the poster for it, but yeah, that kind of spoils it.
It severely.
But yeah, the end shot is just pure horror gold.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of gold in this movie. I think my favorite moment in the entire film is when they first discover that the doors are closed to the front door. And as they're talking, this guy just goes, yeah, boom, and just slams down on the ground. It never fails to shock the hell out of me, because I get so sucked into what the people are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think of the found footage element? Do you think that it makes sense?
Well, just because of the experience that I saw with the real life account of 9/11, I've at least seen why somebody would do this. Yeah. What I really appreciated in this movie is, we have somebody who's annoying enough to do it. So both movies, like Heather and Angela, are severely annoying and obsessed with cameras. Yeah. Obsessed with looking like good documentarians. Yeah. And because of that, it works, but also the fact that you're dealing with the police are seemingly using some sort of power play. Therefore, it's the equivalent of whipping out your phone because a cop walks by. Yeah. So I really appreciated that they actually had the rest of the apartment block just like, no, you fucking film this. Like, don't put that camera down. Yeah. I think by the end, they stretched it a bit. There were moments at a certain point that I'm like, Pablo, put it down and go get that guy off the floor. Like, you're such a dick.
I think they said at one point, wasn't it, like, we need the light from the camera, and that's why I thought it was great. There was no point at which I was like, why are they still shooting? Why they were still shooting? You know, it just made sense, and they laid that groundwork, like you said. They laid it. You know, it was a very brief moment where they were like, okay, we're going to record this because we want people to see. But it was just Perfect. I love Rec. Would you recommend Rec to people?
Again, absolutely. Maybe watch the Blair Witch Project first if you haven't got there, just to kind of ease yourself into the shaky cam without a lot of running, because there's a lot of running in Rec.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, if anyone was tired of the zombie trope, this is the film for them.
Yeah, it did it for me. I'm not a big zombie fan, and Rec is one of the few zombie movies that I just find super watchable.
Yeah, same. So the big question is, if you were to choose one of them, which one would you choose over the other?
Okay, I got to think a little bit, because is it the nostalgia that's going to drive me here? Is it... I'm going to say the Blair Witch Project.
Okay.
For a multitude of reasons. One of the main reasons is because the filmmaking is so on point. There are things they have done in that movie that no other found footage movie that I have seen, for the record, has done. Things such as, they have the 2 camera systems. You have one that's black and white, you have one that's a handheld, and they will use the audio from one, but they will show the video footage of the other as if it's like a police crew had to just assemble a cut make it work. Those details are what makes it feel so real to me, because you have broken footage slapped together to make it seem like it's more cohesive, whereas Rec is more like a broken up one take. That's not the only reason, but that, on top of just the way they made it, knowing that these people are legitimately freaked out in some instances, and you can see it. I just think that I'm a big folk horror kind of person, so that will always edge it just a little bit for me. You make more found footage folk horror movies. I want to see that.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that they haven't. There was a film called The Borderlands that also touched on the folk horror element and was found footage as well. And that was really, really good. But yeah, you think there would be more folk horror because of the way that we do have these little documentaries. Like there's loads on Amazon Prime about like little small town kind of folklores and all that. So it's funny how they haven't done that. For me, it's really hard because I'd agree with you with the Blair Witch, but I fucking love Rec so much. And I think the reason I like it is because I watch 7 or 8 horror films a week, right? I watch a shitload of horror, and it's like, okay, yeah. But Rec was like a fucking punch in the face, where I was just like, holy shit, like this has reignited, it's like that once in a lifetime film that kind of comes around and reignites. Not that I ever stopped loving horror, obviously, but it sparks that little bit of like, fuck yeah, like this is really good. And so for that reason, I'm going to go with Rec.
All right, yeah.
I fucking love Rec.
I feel it's a perfect double feature. So
it really is, isn't it? Yeah.
I was so happy when we came to the conclusion of Rec. I was like, yes. Oh, it's perfect. Done it. We curated it now.
So are there any other found footage films that you'd recommend?
Well, we've already mentioned Host, which is just so fucked up. People should watch it.
Yeah.
You've already covered this movie, and this is the one that I recommended. That the only other movie I feel that has come close to doing the types of things that the Blair Witch Project did was Lake Mungo. That one, because it's a mockumentary inside of a found footage, inside of a personal diary.
Yeah.
Just, geez, that movie. Also, it shows the power of emotion that you can have when you're trying to show real people.
Yeah.
I think The Last Exorcism doesn't get enough credit.
Okay.
That's a really fun movie.
Yeah.
It is kind of like the Conjuring universe take on a found footage movie.
Yeah.
If you will. There's a lot of cheap jump scares and stuff in it, but I just think that the premise of it's really fun and the scares are legit. So that one, I could say people should reevaluate.
Yeah. There's only one other found footage film that I'm kind of thinking of, and I think it was it Hell House LLC? Is that about the scare? They're going around. There's like they're going around trying to find like haunted attractions, and then something really weird happens. And the only reason that sticks out in my head is there's a person that has like this doll mask on.
Ugh.
and she follows them around everywhere, and for some reason that just really creeped me out. And plus I really love the subject of haunted attractions and like scare actors. I love them. So I quite enjoyed that film. That really creeped me out a bit. But yeah, what do you think is the future of found footage films?
Oh, the future is pretty vibrant, I'd say. We've had the Zoom era, so I think that's kind of tapped. I think Host did that so well that
Perfect.
You're going to see a lot of copycats. I'm sure we're going to get some unfriended sequels out of this. But I think that we're probably going to get more stuff like somebody with their cell phone, just maybe getting in like a car wreck or something, going out in the woods. Or indeed, I would probably predict people doing little documentaries with their own equipment and small personal stuff. I think is where we're going to go with it, if it's going the way it's been going, at least.
Yeah.
But found footage, and I have to say I did not learn that. I learned this like this year, so this is not like my own knowledge, but I learned this a lot from Mary Beth McAndrews. She, if y'all don't know who that is, please check out Mary Beth on Twitter if you want to hear about some found footage knowledge. But she spoke in a symposium about how found footage is all about exploring the fear of technology that we have. So wherever you see technology going, that's kind of where found footage is about to head. So maybe we're getting like computer chips in the brain, stuff with your vision. Maybe we'll get something like what was the name of it?
The Black Mirror kind of.
Yeah, like Black Mirror, but what was the Lee Wannell film that he did before The Invisible Man? I have not seen it yet. Oh, I'm outing myself now. The guy's like kind of like a robot, like cyborg, because he has a chip in his brain. But there's also they did a segment, and I think it was VHS 2, where you have somebody who has an implant in their eye.
Yes,
so you can see it from their eye. I think we're going to get more stuff like that as well.
Okay,
a lot of creativity. I'm hoping more folk horror, but who knows? We're seeing a lot of supernatural horror with it. It seems to work really well with ghosts.
Yeah. Absolutely. So before we wrap up here, I always ask my guests, what is your favorite horror film?
I don't have a single favorite horror film. I'm gonna use my de facto answer for this one. Then it's gonna that'd be Pan's Labyrinth.
Okay.
Like I said, I love folk horror. I love fairy tales. And Del Toro to me is just a perfect filmmaker.
Yeah.
In even movies of his that I don't love the subject matter of, he's still good at what he does. But Pan's Labyrinth, I think, is the perfect amalgamation of genres.
Yeah.
And the horror in it, I think, is just as strong as any of the rest of the genres to it.
Yeah.
And I think it tells horror in a way that I tend to see and analyze horror, but it's there on the surface. So that's why I really like it. It's an easy watch for me.
Yeah, I love Pan's Labyrinth. It's just like you were saying, your podcast is about beautiful horror films. There's no more beautiful than Pan's Labyrinth.
It was episode 1.
Was it? Okay. But yeah, the creature with like that scene with the creature with the hands, and the eyes, just the setting of that is just gothic, like fabulousness. It's just stunning. And I think Del Toro just has one of those minds that I just want to get my fingers into and just physically, if I could
just siphon it.
Right. I know that sounds really weird. I just want to put my fingers in his brain and shuffle around a bit.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But everything, I mean, like, I wasn't the biggest fan of like, what was the one? Shape of Water?
Oh, really? Oh, I love it.
But
I can see why somebody might not.
But visually,
stunning.
Absolute fucking stunning. And I could still watch it and I could still appreciate it. And that's one thing, I find with a lot of directors where you're like, oh, I don't really like that film of theirs, I can't watch it. Whereas Del Toro, I go to a Del Toro film to watch it, to actually watch it. And I think he's a master.
Yeah, somebody can suggest your least favorite Del Toro film and be like, hey, you want to watch Blade 2? And you'd be like, yes.
Sure. Okay.
Sure. Yes, we'll watch that.
Or like Hellboy, I'd be like, okay, yeah, all right. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I loved it. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for discussing one of my favorite subgenres of horror.
Oh, absolutely one of mine as well. So this was an equally enjoyable conversation.
So that was my chat there with Chandler Bullock about the subgenre that is found footage. Now, whether you love it or you hate it, it has become one of those like pinnacle horror moments. And you know what? It's a great subgenre for like indie filmmakers or people just starting off making films, because it's so easy to kind of make. And I think it's great. I love found footage. Fight me. So myself and Chandler, we talked about the Blair Witch Project from 1999 and Rec from 2007. So I hope you enjoyed our chat. If you have anything to say, get in touch with us on Instagram or Facebook at What a Scream Podcast. I'm on Twitter at what_scream. Apart from that, I hope everyone has been enjoying Candyman. Nia DaCosta's Candyman. I really hope that you are enjoying the discourse on it. I haven't seen it yet, which is ridiculous. I'm actually waiting for my friends to come off of holiday so I can go see it with them, because I've been put on an embargo and I'm not allowed to go see it before they're back from holiday. But yeah, and don't forget that it is Nia DaCosta's. It's not Jordan Peele's. Let's just join that. And also, for all these people that are like, let's keep politics and socioeconomic issues out of horror. If you think that, you obviously don't know what horror is about, okay? Horror is political. It's always been political. It's always been about socioeconomic issues. Horror's always had something to say. And if you don't think that, then like you're batting for the wrong team here, okay? Welcome to my TED Talk. But yeah, as always, I hope you are staying horrific, and goodbye. Shouldn't be scared of the Dracula. Shouldn't be scared of the